Oh, I'm sorry. גבירותיי ורבותיי, אני אשמח להתחיל ברשותכם, מאחר שאנחנו בשעה איחור. שמי דנה אריאלי-הורוביץ. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert, I would like to start as we are 60 minutes late, and I know that some of you may like to have lunch. I don't know if you'll be able to do it in 15 minutes, but what we're going to do basically is we're going to keep the time scheduled for our panel. Therefore, we have to start. Okay. So I'm very honored and delighted to open the 9th section of the international conference. We have 3 speakers with us, and we would like to have 15 or even 20 minutes for discussion later on. So that's altogether gives us an hour and a half. Let me very briefly introduce the speakers. We have first talk by Professor Riczard Landis, who is coming from Boston University, where he's been teaching history. Professor Landis is the author of many, many books. I won't be able to quote to you all of them, but I'll just mention that recently he's been the editor of the Apocalyptic Year 1000 that came out at Oxford University Press. He would be addressing us today and talking about on the return of conspiracy thinking to the mainstream. This would be our first talk. Just kind of hesitating if it would be a good idea to present all the speakers now and then just let them talk. But I should say to all of you that I'm going to sort of wave you 5 minutes before the time is running out of you, so that you would know exactly the time limitations. Okay. So Professor Riczard Landis would be our first speaker, as I've mentioned. We're then honored with Dr. Joel. How should I say it? Kotek?
Kotek. It's easy.
Kotek. Yeah, very coquette. Kotek. Okay. French as always. Okay. Joel is the director of the formation in the French Memorial de la Shoah in Paris. He also teaches at the Free University of Brussels. Again, author of a number of books, but just recently there is a publication by Berg International, which deals with anti-Semitic postcards from the Dreyfus Affair till the Holocaust. And obviously today he's going to show us some images, so he would be our second speaker. And finally, I'm delighted to have Professor Rephael Israeli from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, who is going to talk to us about European themes in contemporary Arab anti-Semitism. Are you using images as well? No. Okay.
We have no time.
Well, okay. Again, Professor Israeli is an author of many, many books. I'll just briefly mention his last book came out in 2004, deal with the Iraq War, and came out in the Sussex Academic Press. Can you show maybe just the cover? Because you have it with you? But that's the previous one. Okay.
Islamic
Okay.
There are leaflets in the table if
any of you are interested. And again, Professor Israeli will talk to us about European themes in contemporary Arab anti-Semitism. So let's go to this, I believe, fascinating voyage, and hopefully we'll have some sort of a discussion later on.
Okay, is that good? Can you hear me? Okay, let me begin with 2 anecdotes from a relatively calm, non-radicalized American campus. Number 1, I once suggested to a colleague in African American studies that we have a conference at Boston University on conspiracy theory, to which he responded, blanching somewhat as if that were possible, but how could we control the audience? Number 2, I was on a panel consisting of 3 rappers, an African American professor, and myself discussing apocalyptic themes in hip-hop. The notion that the United States government was injecting AIDS into the black communities came up so often that finally one of the exasperated members of the audience said, "How many on the panel believe these AIDS conspiracies?" The three rappers all did. I was the only one who didn't. The African-American professor, who was not known as a radical or even a liberal, said, "I don't want to answer that because if I do, I'll lose credibility with my colleagues, and if I don't, I'll lose credibility with the brothers." Now, between them, these two anecdotes tell us some extremely important elements of what we need to think about when we think about conspiracy theories. Number one, conspiracism is volatile. Even to talk about conspiracy theories can run away with, your audience can run away with you. In James Scott's terms, conspiracies are hidden transcripts, pushed out of the public transcript, particularly in civil society. To raise them is to court an eruption of hidden transcripts into the public sphere. And given that the Shoah came to us via a people in the grip of mass paranoia, believers in a giant Jewish conspiracy that acted as a warrant for genocide, we need to beware conspiracy theories. Conspiracism, and number two, conspiracism is far more common than the formal public record registers. More than the three rappers, the African-American professor's response reveals both the depth of the belief and its community-wide validity. No one can question this particular AIDS conspiracy in the black community without being viewed as having abandoned the community, in this case become an Oreo. A conspiracy theory seeks to explain either one extremely important event, of what we could call a singular conspiracy theory, or a whole pattern of events, what I'd like to call a global conspiracy theory, by positing a small group of conspirators who are manipulating the public's perception in order to carry out a nefarious deed of great damage to the public. Most singular conspiracy theories work on the principle of cui bono, to who benefits. They concern past events and they explain them. They also tend to be passive. Who can fight such powerful hidden forces? For instance, the Kennedy conspiracy theory stuff largely sort of appealed to people, but it didn't incite any action because it was impossible to deal with these hidden forces. They're cognitive and emotional booby prizes for losers. Now we know why we're screwed, and it's not our faults. Most global conspiracy theories, on the other hand, seek to explain larger cultural phenomena, in particular modernity. The earliest modern conspiracy theories begin in the late 18th century with the Masons blamed for democracy in America and France. Because they warn about a conspiracy in progress, they often, almost always, involve a question of timing. How far advanced is the conspiracy and when will it go public? Global conspiracies, because they have not already taken place, they're just working, they're a project in operation, most of them can, under the right circumstances, provoke action. The most powerful large-scale conspiracy theories convey a sense that the final stages have been reached, that the conspiracy is about to take over, and that a great battle looms, and without action, we are screwed. All global conspiracy theories thus have apocalyptic elements in all three senses of the word as I use apocalyptic. First, they're radical revelations about the opaque present. In this sense, they're a kind of Gnostic guide, a hermeneutic guide to the present. They're part of a larger cataclysmic final global transformation, and they're about to happen. They're imminent. Most active cataclysmic apocalyptic most active cataclysmic apocalyptic thought, and by that I mean that we are the agents of an enormous cataclysm that will precede the apocalyptic transformation, either into the millennium or into the end of the world. Most of this kind of thought has global conspiracy theories as a central element of its discourse. Conspiracy theories explain catastrophes as the work of men who appear beneficent but secretly conspire to bring about these catastrophes. They assume the worst of these men, so consumed by the desire to dominate others that they will stop at nothing, including the most dastardly conspiracies, to achieve their goals. Conspiracy theories simplify the moral universe. Bad things that happen to us are not our fault. They are the fault of evil others. Future-oriented conspiracy theories seek to warn an innocent victim population of the plots that these unscrupulous others even now set in motion against them. In particular, global conspiracy theories tend to scapegoat. As Girard has pointed out, scapegoating emphasizes the innocence of the scapegoater and the guilt of the designated victim. And here's a quote from Chip Berlay on conspiracism. It is a particular narrative form of scapegoating that frames demonized enemies as part of a vast insidious plot against the common good, while it valorizes the scapegoater, that is the articulator of the conspiracy theory, as a hero for sounding the alarm. Now, I want to go into the psychological appeal of conspiracy theories because you really have to wonder sometimes why people believe these things. I started thinking about this in terms of the protocols, but have since branched out because there are so many conspiracy theories. Cognitively, they offer a gratifying worldview that explains more or less everything. All details cohere, unnoticed and unexplained facts fit into place, everything connects, gains shape, gains color. To the believer, now semiotically aroused with his new conspiracist hermeneutic, the troubling world makes sense. Furthermore, conspiracy theories tend to engage in a systematic projection of bad faith onto the conspirators. The articulator and believer in conspiracy theories lives in a universe where everyone is driven by libido dominandi. Everyone wants to dominate, and as Eli Sagan so eloquently put it in describing the basic political axiom of the pre-modern world, what he called the paranoid imperative, rule or be ruled. If you don't rule others, they will rule you. The only motivation possible among the conspiring enemy is a ruthless lust for power. Okay, I've already mentioned the Gnostic dimension of it. There is Michael Barkin's done very interesting work on the appeal of conspiracy theory, specifically because it's prescribed knowledge, precisely because it's been banished from proper public discourse, it has an appeal. Now, the emotional blandishments of conspiracy theory are at least as attractive as the cognitive rewards. They offer, above all, freedom from any responsibility. Failures, setbacks, sufferings, these are not the victim's fault, they are the work of the conspirators. The dualistic moral universe of us and them that conspiracy theory provides shows up in stark and simple contrast with no gray areas. Conspiracy theories are a quintessential expression of what Scott called a hidden transcript, and here I'd add a hidden transcript of resentment. By and large, conspiracy theories come from circles of people who feel they've been deeply wrong, they're deeply resentful about it, and they want somebody to get. Furthermore, conspiracy theories at once ease the conscience, that is, we are not at fault, we're innocent, and liberates it. There are no limits on what we must do in order to defend ourselves. The more dire the conspiracy, the more liberated the violence of response. Anything is permitted when struggling for one's very existence against some diabolical agent who is plotting to destroy us. Conspiracy theories are narratives that justify aggressive action. The worse the conspiracy, the more aggressive the justifiable action. At their worst, they are, as Norman Cohn called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a warrant for genocide. Now, I want to go into the questions of when does conspiracy theory move from the margins to the center of a culture? When does a conspiracy theory take over? You've got conspiracy theories in Germany right after World War I, all sorts of things, stab in the back and so on, but they're still sort of at the level of the beer hall and the coffee house. How do they go from this sort of private public sphere into and become government policy, for example? So the first thing I'd like to suggest is that these things exist at the level of chatter all the time. Every culture has conspiracy theories. Every culture's got its share of paranoid people, and they're sort of muttering their stuff. The question is, when does it move from, you could say, when does it move from the chatter of the sans-culottes to the policy of the Committee of Public Safety? Now, there are lots of issues to go into here, but I don't want to drag on too long. Okay, one of the points that I do want to make is that there's something enormously self-destructive and self-defeating about conspiracy theories, particularly scapegoating conspiracy theories, because they misidentify the source of the problem, they direct energies in the wrong way, and they, in fact, permit the scapegoaters to come to power. So that, for instance, the more conspiratorial narratives tend to identify marginal and vulnerable populations as conspirators. In the Middle Ages, it's the Jews primarily, but it's also women. The Malleus Maleficarum is just a stunning conspiracy theory about how women want to take over the world in the nastiest possible way. So the more they appeal, the more they do this, the more they pick on vulnerable populations, the more they appeal to the desire to victimize the innocent and dishonestly absolve guilt. And the more the dishonesty of this kind of scapegoating theory takes hold, the more it leads to the seriously self-destructive behavior of misidentifying the source of the suffering. As a result, although attacking the mistaken foe may offer immediate, if temporary, psychological relief, in the long run it intensifies the grip of those who actually impose the suffering. When European populations rose to the paranoid call of rumors about witches and Jews and lepers poisoning their wells and blighting their lives, they ended up putting themselves ever more firmly in the grip of an ecclesiastical inquisition that blighted European life for centuries. At its simplest level, by alleviating the need for self-criticism, indeed by declaring self-criticism a form of betrayal of the cause against the conspirators, and this was the basic logic of the French Terror during the Revolution, by doing this, conspiracy theory relegates the cultures that indulge in it to a cycle of failure and depression. When serious consideration of past errors cannot take place, in other words, when history is written dishonestly, societies have flat learning curves. Moreover, rendering all relations with the other conflictual makes it difficult to solve problems. Conspiracy theories are the crystallization of a worldview of what some anthropologists call absolute scarcity. Every relationship, every event is zero-sum, remorseless zero-sum. Not only if you win, I lose, or if I win, you lose, but I cannot win unless you lose. Every exchange is an attack, and everyone is suspect. Given its destructive capacities, conspiracy theory discourse tends to get banished from public space, particularly in civil societies, and when it does appear, it gets beaten back with silence, contempt, or hostility. And I think that we had something of a demonstration of the dynamics or the problem here in response to Batiao's talk, which I'll mention briefly later on. If, however, conspiracy theory gets well received by the public rather than rejected, the culture in which such a narrative takes in public discourse, that culture is in for a rough ride, especially if that narrative is a global or future-oriented conspiracy theory. And I think that some of the resistance to Batiao comes precisely from the fear of this. Now, the next thing I wanted to discuss was the role of the media. The main point I want to make is that we have, in the last decade or two, entered a new era in terms of conspiracy theories, and that's because of the internet. I got 5 minutes. Because of the internet. The internet has changed. The internet is a petri dish for conspiracy theories, and the number of conspiracy theories about Clinton was more than the last 6 presidents, and the number of conspiracy theories about Bush in his first term was far more than those about Clinton. So we're in a cycle of conspiracy theories, and one of my concerns is that conspiracy theories threaten to break out in Western civil societies. The next part of my talk was supposed to be on conspiracy theories in the Arab world. The two major points I wanted to make is, of course, Dan Pipes wrote a book on this at the end of the 20th century, talked about how this was a culture that's pervaded with it. If possible, it's even more now after 2000 than it was before. It's raised to new levels of public acceptance and sophistication, particularly with the use of new media. But the second point is that when Pipes studied this, he specifically noticed its passive effect, that by and large these conspiracy theories were just the grousing of people who couldn't get anywhere and who felt that the forces they were dealing with were beyond their control. Since 2000, conspiracy theory in the Arab world has moved into an active phase, and that's an extremely ominous development. we can go into it in questions and answers. Then I was going to talk about conspiracy theory in the West. And the main point I wanted to make there is that we have a new kind of conspiracy theory in the West right now, which is conspiracy theories about 9/11 and George Bush, and of course behind George Bush, neocons and Mossad. And what we have here is, first of all, it's not like the left doesn't engage in conspiracy theories, but this conspiracy theory, this particular conspiracy theory is, first of all, I think, an incredibly vicious one. I mean, essentially what it's saying is that George Bush, because of sagging polls, because he wanted to defend his father's honor by taking us into Iraq, and because he wants to create a fascist America and a new world order of, you know, sort of a new American empire over the world, is willing to sacrifice thousands of American lives, take an unbelievable hit to our, our prestige worldwide, and risk sending the American economy into the tubes with this kind of attack. So the kind of thinking that goes into what the conspiracy theorists about 9/11 are willing to entertain about what George Bush and his policymakers are capable of considering as, you know, sort of normal policy is staggering. And then to believe that nothing of this would get leaked, that George Bush, only 9 months in office, would be able to pull this off with an American administration in which nobody would say, oh, I've got to say this to the public, is an absolutely staggering read of what's going on in America. So, okay, so you've got, and this conspiracy theory, I think, is really dangerous in that it is gaining hold. I had a couple of anecdotes. In 2003, I talked to a guy in the media about the Al-Dura affair, and as I was leaving, I think I was probably the only Zionist he had ever met who was open about it, and he said, tell me, do you think that Mossad was behind 9/11? Right? Now, this guy works for ABC. We're not talking about, you know, somebody, all right? So this is, and obviously this is not only something that's circulating in these circles, but something for which most people don't seem to have an answer. The other anecdote is, before I came here, I asked my class how many people had heard about 9/11 conspiracy theories. They had all heard them, and they had heard them almost entirely from people who believed in them. So we're talking about something, and then there was a conference on 9/11 conspiracy theories. New York Times ran an article. It was the most emailed article of the week. So I'd like to finish with some remarks about, first of all, the last point about the mainstreaming of 9/11 conspiracy theories is culturally a catastrophe. And I'd like to talk about how moral equivalence, multiculturalism contributes to this. So first of all, I'm in favor of multiculturalism. I think that Jews obviously will do best under conditions of multiculturalism. I think Jews are great models for multiculturalism, and anybody who wants to get more on this subject, I recommend Rabbi Sachs's book, The Dignity of Difference. I am, however, terrified by the kind of multiculturalism that's working today. And what terrifies me about it is the sort of dogmatic adherence to a notion of moral equivalence. Moral equivalence constitutes an important dimension of multiculturalism as currently practiced. Who are we to judge? All cultures have their own sets of values, and to imply a hierarchy of values is a form of cultural imperialism that we must renounce in order to live in peace with each other. In a kind of therapeutic act of goodwill that features our generosity, but also our stupidity, and also our secret condescension, we say to other cultures, don't worry, we're as bad as you are. Said's Orientalism appeals fundamentally to such sentiments. Now, this kind of therapeutic approach in the intercultural is the intercultural variant of a peculiar trait of modern societies, which is their extraordinary willingness to be self-critical. And I won't go ahead a paragraph on the importance of self-criticism. Absolutely fundamental. Modernity does not exist without self-criticism, neither does democracy. But self-criticism can become pathological, a kind of intellectual form of beaten wife syndrome. If somebody else is angry, it must be my fault. At its extreme, it has a kind of messianic quality to it. It's a kind of masochistic omnipotence fantasy. It's, if everything is my fault, then I can fix everything by changing myself. Thus we have the spectacle of a culture, whether it's the West, with Israel in the lead, willing to publicly self-criticize at levels never before achieved in recorded history of civilizations. And at its most pathological levels, it produces not just moral equivalence, but moral inversion. We, Israel, the US, the West, are not only as bad as you are, we're worse. It's this kind of moral disorientation that's fueled the massive failures of the progressive left since 2000, its hate-fested Durban, its feeding frenzies over Al-Dura and Jenin, its fatal attraction to the paranoid anti-Zionism of global jihad. In this sense, when Chomsky declared in the wake of 9/11 that Americans are the worst terrorists, he opened the door to the conspiracy theories that teem in Western culture today. Think of the reaction to 9/11 as the suggestion that think of the reaction of a 9/11 conspiracist to the suggestion that Hamas planned the Gaza Beach massacre of 6/9/06. That is last week's Gaza Beach massacre. Okay, you suggest that it was done by Hamas on purpose, and cui bono, you got a long list of the advantages for Hamas of being able to pull it off and blame Israel. The response would be outrage. You racist, how dare you suggest that these people would be so base? You must really hate these people to imagine that. And yet he, without hesitation, embraces a far worse thoughts about his own administration, the product of over 2 centuries of sustained effort to purge the ruling elites of our countries from such behavior. All right, I'm on my last 2 pages. In that sense, 9/11 actually constitutes a new direction in the history of conspiracy theories. Normally, conspiracy theories operate in order to scapegoat somebody else and assert both one's own innocence and one's right to violence. It depends on what psychologists call cognitive egocentrism. They think like we do, libido dominandi all around. 9/11's conspiracy theory, as part of a larger project of morally equivalent multiculturalism, actually reverses the project. Left-wing conspiracy theories today, progressives who believe in 9/11, systematically project goodwill onto the cultural other. Islam is a religion of peace. Bin Laden and Hamas have good reasons for their anger, and if only we're nice to them, they'll be nice to us. Thus, the next step after blaming Bush is to exonerate Bin Laden. Bush is creating an Islamic bogeyman who does not exist. Bin Laden is an agent of the USA. Meanwhile, the other, global Islamism, particularly in its dominant Salafi form, systematically projects ill will onto us. Our concessions, our apologies cannot be sincere, or meant to help. They're a trick or a sign of weakness. This Mobius strip of cognitive egocentrism, where we project our goodwill onto them and they project their ill will onto us, is very dangerous, and policies based on it tend to explode in people's faces. Partly because we are dealing with demopaths, I'm going to skip that. All right. Given the radical instability of sustaining, all right, I'm going to skip something. Let me get this clear. So the problem with this kind of inverted conspiracy theory in which we absolve the other of any kind of guilt and then heap that abuse on part of ourselves, namely the American administration, is that it leaves us wide open to what a friend of mine calls demopaths. Demopaths are people who use democratic language as a way to destroy democracy. So the Muslims who engage in the Anglican dialogues that Margaret was describing yesterday, they have a project. It's not for dialogue. You will use the dialogue to carry out a project in which we run the show. And the problem is that by believing these kinds of conspiracy theories, it's really like a kind of cultural AIDS. It's an inability to recognize an enemy at the same time as heaping abuse on people who may be making mistakes and maybe even not particularly good-willed, but aren't anywhere near as serious an enemy as the enemies that we're dealing with. Okay, so given the radical instability of sustaining such intensely inaccurate views of reality as this Mobius strip of, you have to find some way of explaining why bad things continue to happen. So what do? You go after Bush. The more things go wrong, the more it's Bush's fault, and Krauthammer's come up with this brilliant expression, Bush derangement disorder. And, you know, extend it. American derangement disorder. The Europeans have American derangement disorder. Most of the left has Israel derangement disorder. I mean, these are really serious problems that we have to deal with. Okay, so let me conclude. In the entire talk, I haven't spoken about Jews and anti-Semitism. That'll have to wait for another conference. But I want to make the following three observations. The more feverishly scapegoating the conspiracy theory, the more Jews play a role in it. Postmodern anti-Zionism reflects this fevered quality. Israel, whose behavior in both the battlefield and the street has set standards that no other nation has come near, and I would compare American targeted killings with Israelis, no other nation has come near, becomes a symbol of evil. The Palestinians who have set new lows, whose behavior sets new lows in moral degradation, become the chosen people. The Jews, via this anti-Zionism, therefore play a key cultural role in the conflict at work now. The British boycott illustrates the phenomena. Like some mafia making an undercover cop kill another cop to prove loyalty, the left wants Jews to kill Zionism in order to be accepted. Boycotts and divestment that target Zionism represent the wedge issue driving the operation of this pathological multicultural paradigm that is right now preparing for a Muslim-ruled Europe and a deeply troubled world. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Landis, for a brilliant and a very fast and timetable talk. Yeah, just 3 minutes behind, it's okay. You managed. Dr. Kotek, s'il vous plaît. You're going to talk with you?
Yeah, no, I will try. So my speech will be, I think, an illustration of what has been said for, I would say, the last 3 days, almost what has been said, of course. So, for 6 years, I tried to demonstrate that a cartoon is not a documentary source like any other. Gone is the time when a historian could disregard fixed image, such as newspaper drawings, photography, painting, strip cartoons, or postcards. In a world defined above all by images, the cartoon has become one of the most popular and most effective means of communication, especially, of course, within illiterate societies. Cartoons by Plantu in France, Dave Brown in Britain, or Bukhari in Palestine is certainly just as powerful in forming public opinion as a tradition or as a traditional editorial, if not more so. Let us think about, the Danish case, Danish affairs. It was Napoleon who said that a good sketch was worth more than a long discussion. In the conflict that is tearing the Middle East apart today, the cartoon emerges as an essential ingredient. The open warfare conducted on Israeli and Palestinian soil, using assault rifle, missiles, and booby-trapped cars, is mirrored no less violently through given less media coverage by pencil strokes, Indian ink, and mysterious captions, unmurderous captions. In the field of propaganda, it is the Israeli and the Jews who turns out to be the chief victims. And so my presentation will illustrate on the first part that now anti-Semitism is part of the, I would say, political culture of the Muslim Arab area. And of course I agree, it depends on definition, that maybe it's radical anti-Semitism because it's a new part, because they were only Judeophobic before, but of course Judeophobia did exist within Islam, and now it's really part of the radical anti-Semitism, the one that we unfortunately experience in Europe and especially with the Nazis. And undoubtedly, in demonizing the Jews by images worthy of Nazi propaganda publication, the cartoonists of the Muslim world are borrowing from the worst possible example. And this is what I will show on the first part. And on the second part, I will also try to illustrate a theory of anti-Semitism. And of course, you will agree, the fact that anti-Semitism is not only connected to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but it's an interpretation of history. Weltanschauung, explanation of the world. And the Jews, and it was just explained, are the responsible of this disastrous and of the failure of the Arabic failure, and of course the conspiracy theory are the bulk of what I will present, and I hope it's going to work. And unfortunately, it will be maybe difficult for you to see, because I don't think I will speak so much, because illustration is very easy for me now, because my English is not so good. And during the Danish affair, this cartoonist, who is Christian actually, he's not a Muslim, he's a Christian, he's a Lebanese Christian, he's an Orthodox Christian. And he was interviewed by a very important newspaper in France called Paris Match. Paris Match is the People. And he said that he was against the Danish, cartoonist, because he would never insult a religion personally. And this one is the one who drew, this in 2002, when it's from the Talmud that the poor Palestinian was killed. And of course, this is the vocabulary. This is the first part. The vocabulary used by the cartoonists in the Arab world, whether they are Christian or Muslim, are of course the vocabulary that was used by the Nazis. And then you see the cover of the Stürmer, and then you will see, exactly the same representation of a Jew. And this was taken from the Al-Hayat al-Jadida, which is of course a very important daily. Journal quotidien in here, and it was during the visit of the Pope in Israel and Palestine. And then again, you will see that obviously it's not anti-Zionist or anti-Israeli. Obviously, the vocabulary is, of course, attacking Israel as such. Because you see on this Jordan cartoon that the Jew is represented as Hasid with the menorah, and on the other side you see Sharon, and you saw the guns, and you see, the parallel between the guns and the Torah. And we saw it yesterday, exactly the same. We've got the same inspiration, but it's taken from my book that I wrote now, I think 4 years ago. And you see exactly the same inspiration, the conspiracy theory, the fact that the Jews are controlling the world. Yesterday, of course, it was Bolshevism, and then England still counts, because the last one is the British Empire. And nowadays, this is the Jordan one. You see. Yeah, of course. You see, of course, the Magen David, you see the America, the UN, the Arabic world, and the Palestinian. And the same here, the capital is Jew. This is a French cartoon out of the 30s, and then this is an American Arab cartoonist working in California, and the same. It will represent, we call it in the vocabulary, the Jew, le Juif monde, the Jew world, the Jew controlling the world. And again, this is a Serbian, of course, during Nazi occupation, anti-Masonic, anti-Jewry cartoon, the Jew controlling and manipulating Stalin and Churchill. On the other one, you will see Sharon manipulating George Bush, like many people believe, unfortunately now, then the UN and the Arabic world. Yesterday also it was shown, the spider, the fact this is typically Nazi, I would say, yes, cartoon or illustration. And this is nowadays, of course, and it was not only Sharon, this was Barak as such, who was represented as a spider. And this is a new one, and you will see the Jews represented as rats, which is really very connotated. This is also the crucifixion, of course. This is, referring to the Islamic tradition, because the Jew were not supposed to have killed Jesus. And this is, the fact that, crucifixion is repeated and repeated again by the Jew. And this is an anti-Semitic American illustration of the beginning of the 20th century. And also it's important to see because it represents the Jew, not as the Jew itself, but as a symbol of modernity. The Jews, anti-Semitism, it's also because there is a confusion, an homology between Judaism and modernity, and the Jew, you see, democracy. So you see the connection also, and this is going to be the conclusion of my demonstration, and this is what Judah ought to do. And in a sense, they are also genocidal, in you can say illustration. And again, crucifixion, very important. You see Nazi, of course, taken from the Stürmer. Then you see classical anti-Semitic cartoon from the Stürmer, and you see again the Jews, killing the new Christ, and this is Germany. And of course, this is a representation now is very well spread within the new Arabic caricatures. And then you see again Palestine represented whether as a man or as a boy, crucified by the new Romans, by the new Jews, etc. And this is the cries of the nations. And again and again, you will find hundreds of caricatures like this. And this is one, maybe the most important Palestinian caricaturist, Baha Bukhari. And of course, they say don't kill him twice, because and this is really a very old, of course, anti-Semitic myth. So, the most important, I will learn you maybe some more thing, but this is just to remind you, because we know all of this, unfortunately. It's not a surprise for us, but the most terrible, anti-Judaism myth was the fact that the Jew, as you know, it was repeated yesterday, so I will go. This is a classic example of the Jew who likes to take blood. This is, illustration from the Quattrocento, Italy. And this is taken from the Stürmer. This is again taken from the Stürmer. And this is, Palestine illustration. And then you will see a Jew with the portrait of Shimon Peres behind him, sucking the blood from Palestinian child and water from Lebanon. And this is the cover of fascists, just to see, the fact that it looks alike, it is the same vocabulary. And then you will see an Italian representative of the Jew, 1941. Of course, it's a fascist magazine. And then you will see again, this is a terrible, cartoon. It's a very old one. It's 1988. It's from Kuwait. And then you see it's called the Jewish Nazi bread. And you will see a young child put in the oven. And again, this is taken from the official press service of the Palestinian Authority. Well, it was taken 3 years ago. And then it's in between ritual murder and Auschwitz. It's a mixture. And the new ogre is the Jew. And it was Sharon. Sharon was the representation of the ogre, of the traditional ogre that we have in the Middle Age. I don't know if you see there, but unfortunately, this is how how it is. And you see, really, he's dressed like an ogre. He's the ogre of the nightmare that we had when we were children. And it was repeated. You will find cartoons like this by hundreds, or if not by thousands, all over the magazines and the press. And this actually was made by Dan Brown, who was a very famous English caricaturist. And there were, polemics, and maybe we can discuss it after. Is it anti-Zionist? Is it anti-Semitic? And of course it's anti-Semitic, because if it would be anti-Zionist or anti-Israeli if Sharon would have eaten his own children. It means an Israeli boy, and then it could be an interpretation of his policy. Unfortunately, he's eating a Palestinian child. And this makes a difference between anti-Israeli critic and anti-Semitic. Because, and unfortunately, he won the first prize of the British cartoonists. There was a kind of, and this, of course, again, you will find in the press, and the press. And of course, it gives a terrible image of the Jews within. And the Jews are always represented as child killer. And this is taken from a magazine given for children, and that you should read during Ramadan period when you have time, to discuss with your children. And of course, how they represent the Jew as an ogre, as a horrible beast, almost like, the Stürmer types, and also with the swastika. And again, and this is just to show the vocabulary. This is a leaflet who was produced during the Bailey's affairs in 1911, and it's exactly the same. The Jews are killing children. And Omar Joha, which is one of the most famous, and this posters was produced in the United States campus in San Francisco, and it's very strange because it summarizes really the confusion, and I would say the new anti-Semitism, old anti-Semitism, because it's supposed to be a can made out of Palestinian children meat. And what makes it definitely anti-Semitic, no doubt about it, is the fact that this child is slaughtered according to Jewish rights under American license. And this is, you cannot say it's a critic of Israel. It's really an anti-Semitic vocabulary. And again, this is a way to appeal to the boycott of Israeli or Jewish products. Of course, Johnson & Johnson has nothing to do with Jew, but I don't know. I suppose they sell their products in here. And so again, they try to force the people not to buy Johnson & Johnson just by putting a young child, and it's, I don't know how, they try to work on certain things. And so the Jew is always represented as vampire, and again as the responsible of modernism, of modernity. And this is very important. This is a 1905 cartoon, postcards produced by French anti-modernists. They are supposed to be two peasants from Brittany. They are Christian, of course, and they despise the bourgeois, who agrees to go on the Christ just for honor and to enter the society. And you see the Republic is represented as a Jewish Republic, and the Jew is responsible of the decadence, what we call modernity, but what will they consider as decadent of France, the transformation of France. This is during Zola affair, and you see how Zola. This is Reynac, who was his lawyer, defender, and he's represented, the only one, as a vampire. And look, his eyes. Ah no, it's not here. It's this other one. And then when Shaul Mofaz was represented, it's almost the same representation, the same eyes. It's very strange. I wonder if they knew about that. I doubt it. So, and this is again Shaul Mofaz. You know, he's a vampire. And this is Omar Joa. And this, contrary to what we said yesterday in the picture, is not Palestinian, it's from Brazil. It's Latcaro Latouf, which the most important, I would say, caricaturist in the against anti-mondialization, anti-globalization cause. And again, you saw it yesterday. This is taken from Al-Aram. Al-Aram, as you know, is the main newspaper in Egypt. And then you see Israeli killing young Palestinian children to release the Jew to drink their blood. And this is a new one, because even Shaul Mofaz and of course the new Prime Minister of Israel now also, and this is a new one. It's from 8th of March 2006, and of course there is a decreasing of such a kind of caricature of cartoons, but still, the new Prime Minister, he also likes blood, unfortunately. So it's not so different. So, and more or less, I would say more or less the conclusion, 5 minutes, the Jew as the explanation of the Malheur Arabe, and then you will see that the Jew, the Jew is responsible of everything which is terrible in the Arabic world. And it's an inversion. It's the Jew who are responsible. And this is, how they represent day-to-day Al-Watan in Oman. Of course, as we say, the responsible, this is from Egypt, Sharon being responsible of 11th of September. And this guy actually is not, how to say, an outsider. He's the president of the chamber of the Egyptian cartoonists, so it's always mainstream. This is important to stress. When Hariri was killed, of course, it was responsible of the Israeli. And of course, and this is important, Darfur. I tried to see the representation of Darfur. How do the Arabic cartoonists see the Darfur crisis? And of course, you will see that we are innocent. Darfur doesn't exist. Darfur, it's, how to say, it's an invention of the West to make us forget about what's the real Holocaust happening in Palestine. And this is some Darfur, that you can find. So, I updated my research assignment. So, this is how they represent. Like we are innocent, and the West is using the Darfur cause just to punish us. You see the Arab League, Iraq, and Darfur, and Palestine. Then you can see again, Sharon continue his policy, and then you will see the Americans annoying the innocent people from Sudan. And this is important. I haven't found one cartoon criticizing the Sudanese policy in Sudan. And this is the Danish also, the Danish the Danish affair seen by the mainstream Arabic cartoonists. And then again, who is responsible of the cartoons published in Denmark, the recent affairs, and of course you will see, and it's very difficult for the Arabic cartoonists to represent Denmark. They will do it whether as cheese or whether as a coal, because it's difficult. Dane, what is a Dane? In French, you can have a baguette, in English, I don't know how. And so the waste, and so I think you will see that according to those cartoonists, it's again the Jew who pushed, in a sense, in fact, and this is from the Iran, I took it just now, from the competition which was launched in Iran. And then again, you will see it's the Jews who pushed the Dane, the English and the Americans to fight against Islam. And then you can say, of course, the Jews say freedom of expression, okay, but not when it's question of Holocaust. And again, this is from Brazil. It's some of the how the cartoon which has been how to say primed by the Iranian protests, and then you will see again the use of Holocaust, the use of the Shoah against Israel in a very crude way. Again, Denmark, then you will see freedom, democracy milk, and then you see the Nazi, the swastika, and of course the Israeli hand. And this is really obvious. You see the Danish cartoonist, and then you see, you know, who is behind, exactly, behind this. And again, everything which is modern is supposed to be Jewish. So hamburger, as we know, is a highly kosher product. Coca-Cola, as we know, is an Israeli product. And voila, and I apologize with... even Europe is considered, because in the conspiracy theory, as an enemy, of course, of Islam. Because contrary to what some people believe, of course, Europe is against the Arabic world, and it was not by purpose, but it happens to be my last one, in the sense like this. And honestly, it was not on purpose, but it demonstrated when you have a conspiracy theory, everyone's is against you. And even, you know, and what could be the link between the European Union Constitution and the Arab Union Constitution? Absolutely no. But when you live in such an atmosphere, everyone, you will take the responsibility, of course, first to the Jew, then the Americans, but even Europe is considered by the Arabs as their own enemies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kotek, for a very fascinating and also very up-to-date presentation. I really enjoyed it. Can I please call Professor Rephael? There you are. Okay.
Distracting. So finish, then I start. Okay, good day. Good day. I'm waiting that everybody finishes his dialogues. So I don't want to disturb anybody, you see. It's not easy to be sandwiched between your fatigue and your hunger. But I'll try to manage. Just before the lecture, a few people who were very worried approached me and said, look, what we heard so far in the conference was not very cheerful, to say the least. So I said, look, to be worried is part of the Jewish condition. What would we be if we could not worry? And it reminded me that there is a Jewish family before the times of the fax, which received a telegram from their close parents from somewhere, and the fax said these words. The telegram said, "Start worrying. Details in the mail." So you can continue to worry. That's all right. So, coming to my lecture, as I always say, I'll say a few words, and then I'll say something. The few words are that sometimes we use words, as we heard yesterday, and I refer specifically to Bassam Tibi. But he only reflects a state of mind, which is unfortunately very current, and which I reject, lock, stock, and barrel. This whole idea, I refer to two themes of his. One is about the differentiation between Islam and Islamism that you see among intellectuals of all sorts and politicians. There are those bad Islamists who are radicals, who are evil. On the other hand, there is this peace-loving Islam that we should cultivate and be friends with and so on. Well, nothing of the sort. Because, my friends, I'm asking you one question. If it were so, then the majority of the Muslims in the world will be the peace-loving, and we would have only a very few who would pursue radicalism, terrorism, and what have you. And I'm asking how come that when September 11 happened, you had crowds in Pakistan and in Gaza and in Egypt celebrating in the streets. Are they radicals? Are they Islamists? Just crowds in the street who were distributing sweets to the kids. Egypt, so-called moderate country and ally of the United States, on the morning after September 11, you could see articles, headlines, editorials praising that thing, and not from the radical Muslims, from the mainstream of Egyptian papers. You had, for example, someone who is supposed to be a humanist, who was the president of the Arab Writer Association, right? And he wrote, "This was the happiest day of my life." He is not a radical Muslim. He is just a Muslim. And another one, the president of the Organization of Egyptian Psychiatrists, again someone with the title of doctor, who studied, by the way, in the West, writes an article in an Egyptian mainstream newspaper speaking about the humiliation of America and trying to explain in psychological terms why it was right to humiliate America and so on and so forth. Not a word of sympathy for the victims. And some of them, of course, refer to the conspiracies that we heard now, the Mossad and all those things. But I'm not talking about that. 3 days after the event, Al Jazeera, which is considered to be the CNN of the Islamic world, held a symposium, broadcast live. And I listened to those symposia because they are very important and very indicative of a state of mind. In that symposium, there was one Tunisian who was moderate, and all the others from other Arab countries. And the theme was Bin Laden, a hero or a terrorist? And they said what they said. The only one who dared to say something about Bin Laden as a terrorist was that Tunisian, and he was shut off by attacks with all the others, including the moderator of the program. How dare you? How dare you? And then they started to have, and I'm making a long story short, they started to get calls from the entire Arab world voting for the motion, terrorist or hero. And then they announced the results. And the results were that 86, I'm quoting the exact number, from the entire Arab world said that he was a hero. Only 8% said he was a terrorist. And then the moderator explains to the audience that the numbers would have been much higher if the poor people or the real Muslims who respect Bin Laden and would have voted for him if they had computers and they could participate in the vote. But because they could not, the 86%, as a matter of fact, does not represent the real majority, the overwhelming majority in the Islamic world. So I'm asking all those who speak about this nonsense of Islamists, all those people who answered, all those people who participated in the symposium, were they Islamists? Were they radicals? They were just Muslims. Because, my friends, indeed, there is no invention of a new Islam that is called an Islamist Islam. It is one religion, Islam. You can, of course, observe it or implement it in various degrees of observation. And there are people who observe more, and there are others who observe less. But the fact is that there is a hardcore of activists. Like in a political party, you say all these people are members of the Democratic Party. So you'll have a couple of thousand who will go out to the street to organize the manifestations or demonstrations and so on. And all the others are sympathizers or just nominal members. And this is exactly what you have in Islam. You have one religion of Islam, you have a block of activists, some of them we call by mistake suicide bombers. There is nothing suicidal about them, and that's another issue that is tackled in the book, in the Islamic book, and I leave that to another occasion. And there are all the others who sympathize with it, because every time a bus blows up in Israel, you see people dancing in the streets of Gaza and distributing sweets. Are they all radicals? No. Or when a bus is blown up in Tel Aviv, you'll see in Nablus a celebration at the university, Najah University in Gaza, in Nablus. What do? They reconstruct a model of the bus that was just blown up, and they reconstruct, they replay that whole harrowing event of blowing up the bus, and the bus goes up in flame, and you see limbs that are made of cardboard flowing in all directions, and kids and professors and students at the university all clapping with enthusiasm. Are those radicals? Are those Islamists? So what is all this nonsense about these so-called differentiations? They do not exist. The second differentiation that Bassam did yesterday, and I'm sorry that he's not here, he's through his theories and he ran away. The other one is the differentiation so-called between Judeophobia and anti-Semitism. What kind of nonsense is that? What is Judeophobia? He said in Islam there is no anti-Semitism. I'll ask him, and you saw, all of you saw that in the film yesterday, when there were quotations from the Quran and from the Hadith, speaking about the Jews as the descendants of apes and donkeys and pigs. Sorry, apes and pigs. And what is that? That is a compliment to the Jews. Or when you cite that Hadith tradition where you Jews in the last day will hide behind trees and rocks, and the rock and tree will shout, "Oh, Muslim, come and kill him." What is that? A compassion to the Jews, a statement of love to the Jews. You tell me. And that is in Islam. That is part of Islam. It was not invented by so-called radical Islam, and therefore to differentiate between Islamophobia as those who hate the Jews, like in the times of the Quran, and those who want to kill them, those are anti-Semites, is really, that really has no leg to stand on. It comes back to this modern definition which says, who is an anti-Semite? The anti-Semites are those who hate the Jews more than it is necessary. So apparently most Muslims find it necessary, or more than necessary, and therefore we have the manifestation thereof in everything you see or you read across the board. And therefore, my friends, words are very important. And when we use a word, we have to pay attention to what they mean. Because you'll find those Islamists, so-called, or other Muslims, speaking about tolerance, speaking about love, speaking about peace in the world, but they mean other things. And for many naive people, including heads of state, they say, oh, the rest of Muslims are peace-loving. And you see, he said that he wants peace. And he said that he is tolerant. And he said that he loves all the others. And that is enough for them. You know what it reminds me? You know, when perestroika began in the Soviet Union, in the times of Khrushchev, they decided to order from America a supercomputer which could translate automatically from English into Russian all the technical publications in order to catch up with America in the latest technology. So they bring the supercomputer to the Kremlin, and there is an inaugural ceremony with Gorbachev at hand, of course, for the inauguration. And they wanted to try the computer for the inauguration. They decided to put in a verse from the New Testament, which says, The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. They put it into a computer. What they got from the other side in Russian was the vodka is excellent, but the meat is rotten. That means that in different contexts, words have a different meaning. And you can use the same word and mean a totally different thing. So those were the few words that I wanted to say. Now let me say something. The something is that as time, 5 minutes. As you say, she's telling me that if I want my speech to be immortal, it doesn't have to be eternal. so I'll cut it short. The themes that I want to deal with, and they will not have time, are the following. What I'm, apart from the Islamic layer of anti-Semitism, which is there, and I have just referred to it, you have a few themes, and I'll enumerate only the most important of them. One is the theme of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, that is borrowed, of course, from Christianity, and the way it is borrowed. And the last manifestation of it we saw both in a television series in Egypt 2 years ago during the Ramadan, The Horse Without a Rider. It's a fascinating story in itself. And another one was in the Alexandria, when the Alexandria Library, the old vestige from Hellenic period, was inaugurated. They placed next to a Torah scroll a copy of the Protocols of Zion, again as a document of history. And there was a big controversy about it in Egypt itself. The inner argument within Egypt was perhaps the most important part of it, but again, no time. So the next theme would be, of course, the blood libel. And blood libel not only in the obscene way that it is done with the description by a certain PhD doctor from the West, Umayma, in Saudi Arabia, that she messed up the whole topic by claiming that the Jews used the blood of a Christian child in order to make the cakes of Purim. Yeah. You see, so it's a whole story, but nevertheless, there is a very, very fantastic and obscene description how the Christian boy is put into a barrel and how syringes are introduced from the barrel into him, and how the blood is drained and so on. So it's horrific, and it's there. It appears in a mainstream newspaper of so-called moderate Saudi Arabia and so on and so forth. But I'm not only speaking about that, but other forms of blood libel, like what happened in Pesach 1983, it was 27th of March, when there was a whole story made up, one should say, about 1,000 Arab Palestinian girls in Jenin and its neighborhood, which were poisoned by Israel because they started to lose consciousness and so on. They were taken to hospitals, and then it was found out that it was a phenomenon of mass hysteria and so on. That's another kind of form of a blood libel, if you like, the idea of poisoning that comes into fact. And the last theme, the last theme is the one of Holocaust denial, of course. And that also comes into various interesting forms, at the same time approving and denying. For example, Ahmadinejad, you have all watched. At the same time that he says, yeah, there was no Shoah, and he makes fun of the whole thing, he said, and if there were Shoah, that is, the European countries have the responsibility to take the Jews back and so on. It shouldn't be at our expense. That means that there is a possibility that there was a Shoah. The Schindler's List, which proves that they were, is still forbidden in all Arab and Islamic countries. Because God forbid, or Allah forbid, of course, it might prove that there was a Shoah, and therefore they don't let them in, and so on and so forth. And therefore, I think the last word I can say, not being able to elaborate very much on those things, is that at least one lesson we can have is that we don't learn from any lesson from this history, because in all Arab and Islamic writings that I am able to follow, you cannot find one place which does not mention the Jews, of course, in a negative connotation. And therefore, I think that if there is a fight against anti-Semitism, the fight against anti-Semitism should also include a repeated reference to those anti-Jewish and anti-Islamic references to Jews, which are purely anti-Semitic. There is no Judeophobia about it there. Because I say, if you look at all those anti-Semitic, if you look at all Arab and Islamic references today, to look for a place or an article that is clean for anti-Semitism is like sending a blind man into a dark room to look for a black cat which is not there. So look at it, you will not find. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we made it on time, which means that we have a couple of minutes for a discussion. I should say about 10 minutes, maximum 15. And I'm willing to, I know that there are 2 questions over there, so please come and share it with us.
It's not really a question, it's more of a comment. I'll try to make it very brief. As a piece of entertainment, this was very good. As a scientific lecture, I would think it was a bit less so. It is not, I think, right to attack a scholar who is not here, to call what he says nonsense, and he's not even here to be able to answer you. So I will try to do it in his place. I also disagree with Bassam Tibi, but not for the same reasons, exactly the opposite reason. You see, Rafi, you're trying to make all of Islam of one piece, like it's monolithic. It is not monolithic. No religion is monolithic. Not Judaism, not Christianity, not Buddhism, not Hinduism, and not Islam. If you ask 10 Muslims, they will give you different versions of what Islam is all about. If you read the Quran, you will find contradictory verses. You'll find verses which are quite pacific and verses which are quite warlike. The Prophet himself was a warrior. He made wars and battles and so on. On the other hand, he preached peace. So there's no consistency in religion. Religion is not a piece of science which has a scientific coherence and consistency. Religion is fantasy. Religion means you can say contradictory things in different parts of the religion. So I think it is really an oversimplification to say that all Islam is the same. There is no. I agree that the distinction between Islam and Islamism is not correct, but not for the same reason. Because rather than make it monolithic, you should be able to see that there are many different varieties, and not only 2, but there may be 5 or 10 or 15. So this is my point. Thank you very much.
Introduce yourself,
Yeah.
because not everybody's.
Yeah, I'm David Littman. Does this work? Yes. Yeah. I'm David Littman. I'm at the Commission on Human Rights in Geneva, and I represent the Association of World Education, the World Union of Progressive Judaism. Now, it so happens that the expert on conspiracy theories did raise a very interesting caricature, which we tried at the United Nations to have condemned officially, and we failed. And in Batior's book, Islam and Islamism, there is a description, and it shows that on the 11th of December 2000, 2 weeks before the Christmas Jubilee, when the Pope came, a new Palestinian daily, Intifada, displayed on one half of its front page a provocative caricature. Now, this is very interesting to hear what it shows. Showing a crucified young woman called Palestine, with blood flowing from her pierced hands and feet. You saw it, perhaps, when it was put up. A long spear transfixes her body to the cross, its protruding point embossed with a Star of David and an American flag at the shaft end. Blood spurts from her martyred body down upon a trio of huddled caricatured Jews who are looking up, grimacing at the crucified woman meant to represent Jesus Palestine. 3 days later, on the 14th of December, another spiritual message was published by the same newspaper, and which referred to it, saying a prayer, "My Lord, the betrayed by the contemptible, treasonable kiss, and ending, O Son of the Virgin, they cannot overcome you twice." Now, in Geneva, we managed to get a priest, an abbé, Alain René Arbey, and a Protestant pastor, Bank, to write a letter of complaint to the High Commission on Human Rights on this issue. We wrote to the Catholic Church. I know the Papal Nuncio. We wrote to the World Council of Churches. No one, not even the Pope, no one bothered to condemn that. So my question is perhaps to, I should put it to Gerald Kotek or Richard Landis, how is it that such a terrible defamation of Christianity in such a context can be allowed? And the last point concerns the other cartoon you referred to. I think
you've turned off the mic.
I've turned off the mic, I'm sorry. Professor Israeli, Raphael Israeli, referred to what happened in the Alexandria Library. Now again, we raised this issue just before UNESCO did. Now, do you know what happened there? That was when Prodi, the famous Prodi, arrived to, right, I'll try and be brief, arrived to open in the Alexandria Library, financed by the Italians and also UNESCO, the French, this ancient library. And 2 weeks before or after, Prodi arrived to give an extraordinary speech, which you'll find in Batyor's book, but in the later book, Eurabia. And again, the protocols was put there. And believe me, they had a great difficulty taking it away. It was put, there was the Quran, the New Testament, and the Torah, the Old Testament, with this. And we again appeared, and the most moderate Muslim journalist at the UN, I asked him, Muhammad, how is it possible? No one believes in the protocols anymore. He said, Mr. Littman, why doesn't someone come out and prove that it's a forgery? That happened 2 years ago, and he's the most moderate journalist I know there. I said, Muhammad, you're on another planet.
Thank you. We will collect another 2 comments or 3 comments, and then we'll allow the speakers to comment. So you're next, and then Professor Fuad, and you were also waiting. So, okay. That would be the last for this side.
Okay.
We'll see if we have more time.
I was just wondering, all of you have given very, very interesting factual talks, and how does one translate this from the academic to the mainstream, so that people will really understand? Today, the newspapers are full of the fact that Mahmoud Abbas is such a moderate, although some people say the difference between him and the Hamas is that he thinks inside, or says in a whisper in Arabic, what maybe the Hamas says in public. But again, it's been said a few times, why is the Christian church so quiet? And why isn't it really made public that we saw these cartoons about the Jews crucifying Jesus, but of course the Muslims believe that Jesus went up to heaven and never was crucified. He never died. He went up to heaven. The Palestinian propaganda says that the Muslims have been here for 4,000 years. Jesus and the disciples, they all were Muslims. Why aren't these things refuted in public, and not just in an academic circle where it remains in a volume, or but really disseminated for the entire world in mass media? Thank you.
Professor Fuad, please.
What was common to these 3 so very interesting lectures was that you look, or you see, you hear, and you feel sort of helpless, because the question is, what could you do against? And we are all definitely trapped in the trap of a democracy and freedom of speech, because how could you censor? Not only how could you censor, where would you put the line? Where would you put the line between irony and incitement, between defamation and a shown story? Now, in the Institute for the Study of Anti-Semitism and Racism in Tel Aviv, we have collected the laws and paragraphs in constitutions from 190 countries, the member states of the UN, against discrimination of all kinds. And you can see there a difference. And this is a major difference between European countries that have undergone the fascist or Nazi or Second World War history, where a distinction, the law tries to put the line, there is a thought, there is a word, and there is an action. To put the line after the word. If the word or the picture is shown, then it can be debated how much of an incitement is in it. In the United States, in Canada, that have fortunately not undergone the same historical experience, the line is only after the thought, and there is no line. You can think whatever you like, and the word is not to be censored, and the picture neither. So what could you do? You can analyze the laws, you can speak about an attempt to, and I wonder whether the three speakers have participated or initiated anything that tries to define where is the line and what is incitement. And the only thing that I would suggest, and I hope you wouldn't think it's really out of any question, is, and I thought about it after the caricatures in Denmark. What was the claim? That they defamed Muhammad, okay? On the other side, the same people defame Moses or whoever, yeah? So could there be, there was Mr. Lichtman from Geneva, from this committee, yeah, or the third committee of the United Nations that is in charge of human rights. Could there be perhaps a meeting, three major religions, in which what is sacred, or the most sacred terms, would be defined, yeah, and a mutual agreement that these terms are out of question to be defamed. Okay? I know it sounds the Messiah, and I volunteer to be the white donkey that he would ride on, but at least something to have somewhere a line. Thank you.
Thank you. Last comment, please. No, I didn't. She's first, and we're taking 5, and after the first circle, we'll see if we have enough time.
My question is to Professor Landis. In another inversion, it is possible that conspiracy theories can conceal real conspiracies and defame their victims. With the Turkish takeover of power by the Young Turk Ittihadist leaders in 1908, there was a real conspiracy, and it renewed again in 1913. And what happened was that conspiracy theories were spread against the Armenians as a way of blackening the victims before and during the genocide. After the genocide, it was attributed not to Turkish leaders but actually to Jews, because of course the Turkish Ittihadist genocide creators had been Jews in disguise from Salonika. Another way of deflecting responsibility. Is it, one could draw parallels to the Holocaust as well, is it not possible that the huge spate of conspiracy theories since 9/11 have been in part a rather skillful technique to confuse the West and to deflect the West away from attention to what is a genuine series of global networks, multinational, which have been planning terrorism, continue to plan terrorism, including cyber terrorism, which we haven't yet encountered but might be well far worse than 9/11.
My comment is perfectly suited to align with that statement. It's to Richard Landis also. Henry Kissinger once made a famous statement. Just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get me. Where's the line? Okay? What's a conspiracy theory, and what is a rational diagnosis of a genuinely horrible threat?
Please.
All right. Why the unwillingness to condemn things like these cartoons? It seems to me that one of the most staggering aspects of the moral failure of the West since 2000 is that starting in October you have a wave of anti-Semitism that's really global, and an utter failure on the part of the Western opinion leaders, the chattering classes, to condemn it. France is a good example of a kind of silence. It took them literally 3 or 4 years before they started to speak about it. Part of it's denial. I mean, nobody wants to, part of the reason that this session is so depressing is because we're telling you what's going on. And nobody wants to hear it. I mean, it's an incredibly difficult thing. You know, my daughter at one point was just really angry with me because, you know, I've gotten to the point where I joke about it. And she said, you know, if what you're saying is for real, this is not something to joke about. It's not something to joke about. So why the unwillingness, which I think is catastrophic. I mean, I really think that it, you know, it should have been, and when the suicide terrorism began, that's surely when it should have happened. And it still didn't. And you get, you know, flakes like Sherry Blair saying, oh, well, you know, if I were as upset and hopeless as they were, I too. I mean, there's no way Sherry Blair would ever walk into a crowd of civilians and blow herself up. So, you know, what is she saying? Now, I think that a lot of this, you know, goes back to, I think, you know, Batior would probably say, they're already acting like dhimmis. They're intimidated. They don't want to take this stuff on. You know, it was interesting. You had a cartoon before the Pope came to, when the Pope came to Israel. When he came to Syria, Bashar Assad meets him at the airport and says, it's us, the Christians and the Muslims against the Jews. And it was the most fantastic, it was a much better opportunity to teach the world a lesson than going to the Kotel, was to say, no, I'm sorry, that's not what it's about. And that's what the Anglicans should be saying to the Muslims. It's not about screwing the Jews and you and me will be buddies. And yet people fail to speak up. And I think it's got to do with intimidation. I think that instead of laws, what we need to do is, I mean, I just did a course on this, Arab culture in general, Muslim culture in general, these are still fundamentally honor-shame cultures, what anthropologists call honor-shame cultures. I know Edward Said says we can't say that, but I'm sorry. And they are highly responsive to being shamed. And what they do is they intimidate us, and every time there's a little bit of criticism, they sort of say, how dare you criticize me, and we back off. And we think that we're being nice to them, and we're actually encouraging them. So I would say, you know, if there's something that's going to happen, it's going to happen when Europeans and other opinion leaders get the nerve to start saying, this is disgusting behavior. I was in a dialogue group when the suicide bombings began, and I said, you know, this is morally disgusting. And one of the Palestinians got up and said to me, you are dehumanizing me. And I said, you're dehumanizing yourself. Meantime, all the other Jews in the dialogue are going, shh, shut up, you'll upset him. Okay, well, no, I really think we need to upset people. Okay, so that's law versus opinion. I think public opinion is much important. Now, the last two questions were important about, you know, real conspiracies. When Hitler is screaming about a global conspiracy of the Jews to take over and enslave mankind, that's what he's doing. He is engaging in that, and he's using it as a smokescreen. There are real conspiracies. People actually do engage in this stuff. And one of the problems with academics, particularly in civil societies, which is where most academics tend to be, they don't even want to think about this. I mean, you know, my African-American colleague didn't want to because he was afraid of what would happen, but I talked to my other colleagues, and they looked at me like I was from Mars. You know, what do you mean talk about conspiracy theories? Don't even raise the subject. So I would say there's a real problem here. We don't know how to think about this stuff. I'm not going to answer your question. It's an excellent one.
So I will try to be quick. So to answer more or less Dina Parat, to say that, of course, I agree with you. The problem is anti-Semitism is not a purely political problem. If it would be political, it would be easy. There is a plot. Let's denounce the plot. And there are sages of somewhere who are conspiring against us. We denounce it. And, of course, it won't maybe we won't be able to gain the majority of the people, but at least the elite will. And this is what happened with 1921, when the protocol was signed, was denounced. Nobody in Western Europe believes anymore. It means the good people, the intellectual people. But unfortunately, it's not this. Anti-Semitism, as we are, it's a complex phenomenon. It's a social phenomenon. It's a historical phenomenon connected not only to one religion, which is bad by essence, which is anti-Semitic by essence, well, it's going to a crisis which is now within the Arabic world, like it used to be a crisis within the European world. It's like to say we would have been 50 years ago, we would have said all Catholics are against us, and it was like this. Well, Catholicism, and maybe not Anglicanism, has evolved. There have been John Paul II, there have been also John the 23rd, and there is evolution. And also, if you go to Senegal, you won't find this kind of anti-Semitism. And Senegal, those people, by the way, you have to know, they are Muslims. So it depends. You don't have to confuse with a period which is terrible, especially for us, because, and this social phenomenon, where you've got demography elements, inversion, scapegoats, etc. So how can we fight against it? Of course, it's very pessimistic, because it seems to be, and this I fully agree with my friend Simon, it's very difficult to fight against this, because it's like a disease, you know, it's and we know it. So maybe Zionism, it could be one of the best answer. Of course, what we can do is by demonstrating, and that's why I'm using cartoons and illustration, because illustration, it makes the way easier. You don't have to concentrate so well. Images speaks by themselves. And honestly, I've been 2 weeks ago in the European Commission, and I've been invited by European Parliament, by actually a socialist member of the European Parliament, Portuguese. Well, he was not mainstream, you have to know. And I show him, and I show them to the people. One was the vice president of the European Commission. And by, you know, I just, you know, this, I show them this presentation. And honestly, I'm certain that I convinced some of the people. Some of the people were convinced that there is a confusion, that there is a problem, that actually, you know, within the Arabic country, not because they are Muslim, but because of very complex phenomenon, those people, there is a anti-Semitic political culture. You don't have to confuse a religion and a political culture. This is very the big difference. So we have to work. And the last thing to say about the cartoons, of course it's anti-Semitic, but it has nothing to do with Europe. I'm sorry, it's UN. And of course this Commission of Human Rights, it's a disaster, it's a catastrophe. I know, I'm following more or less. Well, Council of Church has nothing to do with the European Commission. I'm sorry to tell you. You don't have to confuse. And the problem of the conspiracy theory, you take one element from there, one element from there, one element from there, you put them together and you say there is, I don't know, some sign of a plot against us. Unfortunately, and I think the conference made by the lady especially of Anti-Semitism, she explained with very complex, you know, elements why it is like this. We have to work, not in a simplistic way, but we have to work, you know, with sophistication, like Professor Palinka tried to teach us at the beginning. Thank you.
Hello to Avner, my friend who made the remark. I want to say that, first of all, I respect your right to ignorance. You just don't have an obligation to show it in public. But you did, that's fine. I just want to say you made a politically correct statement, that's fine. But I brought about 7 or 8, according to my count, pieces of evidence to support what I said. If you have another evidence, please bring it. We all saw the movie yesterday. The movie, I think, backs up every single sentence I said here, and even more. I was less, perhaps, extremist than the movie. You saw that from various parts of the Islamic world saying the very same things. You want the last example? I can add it to you. 1 year after September 11, Dan Rather from CBS News undertook to make a survey, universal survey, about Muslim reactions to the September 11. And he took 8 Islamic countries, from Morocco to Pakistan. And he went to each one of those 8 countries, and he chose a village, not an urban center, not a center of learning, just to find common people. And in each village, he collected all the so-called intellectuals of the village, the doctor, the teachers, somebody who knew how to write and read, or things of that sort. And he put to them the same question: who do you think did September 11? And he said, according to his statistics, 80-something% said, of course the Jews, of course the Mossad, and so on. Now, those are not radical people. Those are not Islamists. Those are just Muslims. So, of course, you can be like in Senegal or in Indonesia, nominal Muslim who doesn't care about Islam, who doesn't know anything about Islam, and he is likely, or he is not. I said there can be. I said.
All the Muslims in Senegal know nothing about
What kind of an expert? Look, if you start shouting,
rudeness is not a
if you start shouting, nobody can say anything.
As a chair who waived her right to speak, I have a lot of comments. Please leave it out of the personal, okay? Please. I know that you want to add a single other word, so.
I said that there are a lot of Islamic, like in Israel. I never go to a synagogue. I don't care particularly about Jewish tradition, but Jewish religion. But I'm still a good Jew. There are a lot of Muslims in Indonesia and Senegal and other places who don't care very much about Islam, but for Islam as their identity. But all the citations I made are in cases of people who speak in the name of Islam. They say Islam says so and so and so on. And there is, of course, a political culture that derives from Islam, even without citing Islam. But every sentence I said has a backing, has citations, and that thick book of 500 pages, you can find citation after citation, and it's not an invention. You have counter-argument, please bring them with evidence. And then I'll look at them. Thank you.
Okay.
I just wanted to make one last comment, and it's related to this debate between Rafi and others. You know, Rafi, I think what you're citing is not really so much Muslim as it is resentment. And if you read what Baudrillard said after 9/11, he wrote an essay in which, to sum it up, I'm quoting him, he said, "They did it, we wanted it." And I think that, you know, on some level, we're talking about an honor-shame reaction in which there's just a thrill of schadenfreude at seeing American take it. Now, I'm not arguing that it's not related to Islam, but I think that you're using a sort of much broader negative reaction against America as specifically Islamic, and it's clearly not. And that's my final point, which is, as far as I can make out, and it really crystallized when I was listening to Margaret Brearley's comments yesterday, it really seems to me that the point about these conspiracy theories that cover conspiracy theories is, first of all, we do have a Protocols of the Elders of Islam. It's actually out there. It's been published. You can read it. It's been, as opposed to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, authenticated. So there really is a plan to take over the world on the part of Islamists. How much it appeals to the rest of the Islamic world is a question, and to some extent how much it appeals to the rest of the Islamic world is related to how stupidly we behave in these matters. The Europeans, it seems to me, are engaged, and the left in general is engaged in suicidal behavior. They are so thrilled at their anti-Americanism that they throw themselves into the arms of people who will, the expression in English is sharing your lunch with a polar bear. You give him the sandwich, and he'll start with the sandwich, and then he'll go to your hand, and then your arm, and so on. This is insane behavior, and I only think I've given up trying to get the left or the Europeans by appealing to them and saying it's anti-Semitic. Forget that it's anti-Semitic. It's killing you. You are killing yourselves by gobbling this stuff up. You're like a 500-pound man who's got a 300 cholesterol count, and you can't stop popping those truffles of moral schadenfreude about the Jews. You can't stop pointing the finger at Israel and saying, you're bad. Well, wake up. You're killing yourself. Thank you.
Some of you want to have lunch. What we'll do now is we'll have a very, very, very short 2 last comments. Okay? One.
אני ביקשתי רשות הדיבור, ואת לא רוצה לתת לי רשות. פרופסור מור.
My name is Juan Moreno from the Institute of Russian and African Studies. About September 11th, during the year 2002, I was visiting professor at Bonn University. Professor Jalal from Damascus University was invited to talk about Islam and September 11. And he said, believe me that all the Muslims and all the Arabs, even the leaders, those who condemned it, and especially Arafat and others, were very happy because of September 11 that learned the West and America a good lesson. Besides, we have Sayyid Qutb, the head of the Muslim Brothers, Al-Ikhwan Muslimun in Egypt. He said, Islam should rule the world because Islam is created by God to lead the world by sword. And the Arabs and the Muslims has to be all united. They are like one body. If one part is ill, all the rest has to come to its help. And Islam will soon rule the world, and then peace will be in the world.
Robert, short comment, very short.
Actually, the most important thing I have to say, I'll give up on the comment, is that we come back at 2:30.
Okay. Choose.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.